So I wanted to share an email that one of my professors sent all of us while we were in pharmacy school. It is kind of long, but I think it's important. How will the material in this course play a role in day-to-day work as a pharmacist? The course that she taught was PDA, or Principles of Drug Action. It was a 4-semester series of basically medicinal chemistry. A lot of students thought that this was the hard course. This is my favorite course. In the index cards that I asked you to write down questions you had about this course, one student asked, how will this material in the course play a role in day-to-day work as a pharmacist? I thought I would send a response to the class from my point of view. Sometimes students ask, why do pharmacists need to know medicinal chemistry and pharmacology? They sometimes suggest that it's not relevant to clinical practice. It all depends on what kind of pharmacist you want to be, drugs or chemicals. I hear many students and pharmacists say that they are drug experts. Medicinal chemistry and pharmacology are foundational courses that teach students how drugs work and interact with the body and other drugs. Pharmacists as drug experts cannot simply recite information from databases on drugs. Pharmacists need to be able to interpret clinical information and apply medicinal chemistry and pharmacology to supply the how and why of a given clinical scenario. In addition, not everything is in a database and the literature. Therefore, there are scenarios where the pharmacist is required to think through the scenario, applying the knowledge they have on medicinal chemistry and pharmacology. Moreover, not everything in drug databases is accurate. The pharmacist needs to have the skills to critically evaluate if what they are reading from a database makes sense and is accurate. Pharmacists need to know the pharmacology of how drugs work to increase the efficacy of a therapeutic plan by using drugs with different mechanisms of action, and to predict and prevent potential drug interactions leading to adverse effects. I will focus on the application of medicinal chemistry to pharmacy practice. The following are a few real-life examples where knowledge of the principles of medicinal chemistry are essential to answer questions that come to pharmacists. Example 1. Years ago, I was asked to consult on a legal case in which a man was required to submit to a urine screen for drugs of abuse. It tested positive for benzoylecgonine, and he was accused of using cocaine. He vehemently denied having used cocaine and suggested that this was a metabolite found in his urine was due to one of the several prescription medications he was taking. I was given his list of the prescription drugs he was taking. From what you will learn about drug metabolism this semester, it was straightforward and clear. The patient was using cocaine, and there was no way the benzoylecgonine in his urine was the result of the other drugs he was taking. You will be able to answer questions like this. She's a bad bitch, and she's right. I also helped someone who had a UDS flag positive for nordiazepam. She was in a bunch of legal trouble because the police thought she was driving on Valium. It was actually her IBS medication, Librax, chlordiazepoxyclinidinium. Example 2. Temazepam is a sedative hypnotic used in the short-term treatment of insomnia. It contains 3-hydroxyl group on the benzodiazepine template, making it more water-soluble than other compounds in this class. Therefore, it does not require CYP3A4 metabolism. This allows it to be used in patients with hepatic dysfunction. If a healthcare professional asks you why, it's more compelling to explain why as opposed to saying the database said so. It largely undergoes phase 2 metabolism. It's one of the LOT benzos, LOT, L-O-T, lorazepam, oxazepam, temazepam, preferred in liver dysfunction. Example 3. Acid-base concepts underscore many therapeutic decisions. The acidic, basic, ionized, and unionized character of drug molecules often determines the appropriateness of one drug over another. It can be used to explain drug-drug interactions, may be related to drug potency, may be related to bioavailability, may be related to duration of action. I've mentioned this before about how Adderall is a weak base, and that's why acidic beverages decrease absorption, because it's ionized. It doesn't cross cell membranes very well like that. Same thing with nicotine lozenges and drinking coffee before. Doesn't absorb well through the cheek or buccally like that, because it's also weak base, it's ionized with acid. But this is also why some drugs don't cross the blood-brain barrier, like glycopyrrolate, or don't cross very well. For example, when the dilution or mixing of the salt form of drugs results in precipitation, the most likely cause is formation of the non-ionized drug form. When a drug is in the non-ionized form, it is less soluble. Furosemide is a weak acid. You can look up the structure and discern for yourself why this is. Here we see it has a carboxylic acid group with a pretty low pKa, so it delivers a proton under physiological conditions, making it a weak acid. Furosemide's solution for injection is adjusted to a pH of 9. At this pH, the drug is nearly completely ionized and therefore soluble. It is unionized, it is practically insoluble in water. Verapamil is a weak base. Again, you can look up the structure and discern for yourself why this is. If we look at the structure, we see it has a tertiary mean right in the middle. With a pKa of almost 9, it can accept a proton. Verapamil solution for injection is adjusted to a pH of 4.9. If a solution of furosemide were administered in a Y-site intravenous injection tubing concurrently with verapamil, what would you expect? You could look this up in a reference and it would tell you that these two drugs are incompatible in Y-site administration, but it does not. tell you why. The package inserts do not tell you that furosemide is an acid and that verapamil is a base. You must be able to discern this by looking at the structures. You might think, I don't need to know why they're compatible, I just need to know that can't mix together. That might be the case for two drugs in which there is data to show incompatibility. But there will not always be compatibility data available in every scenario you will encounter in your career. I get a lot of compatibility questions at my new job. Example 4. A patient taking clozapine had undergone a urine drug screen and tested positive for benzodiazepines. To the knowledge of the treating physician, this patient had not been prescribed any benzodiazepine drugs. By learning medicinal chemistry, you will have the skills to look up the structures and describe a likely explanation. I will mention with issues like this, they can set it off for confirmatory testing. So mass spec, example 5. You just learned the structure-activity relationship of anti-muscarinic action. It is not a particularly stringent set of structural features. Bulky lipophilic groups on one side, some space, and a charged nitrogen on the other side. Many drugs that are used for completely different pharmacological actions may have structural features, affording them with varying degrees of anticholinergic effects. There's an increased risk of dementia in patients 65 or older who have a higher cumulative use of these drugs with anticholinergic effect. We call this anticholinergic burden. Some examples are like Benadryl, amitriptyline. Furthermore, a study showed that high use of drugs with anticholinergic effects in patients 65 years and older with depression living in nursing homes was associated with a 31% increased risk of mortality. With your current knowledge of medicinal chemistry, you have the skills to look over the structures of a list of drugs that are not being used as anticholinergics and predict whether there is a potential for a drug to have anticholinergic activity. I'll mention that not only do you have to consider the activity of a drug into like, oh, is it anticholinergic? You also have to consider, does it get into the brain? Does it cross the blood-brain barrier? Some drugs are anticholinergic, but they mainly stay in the periphery. I mentioned earlier glycopyrrolate. The above are just a few examples. Students during their rotations, doing residencies, and doing fellowships tell me that they frequently use the information they learned in the principles of drug action sequence. Former students who are now practicing tell me that they continue to use concepts that they learned in PDA. Within the PDA series of courses, we'll learn about the relationships between chemical structures and biological effects. You will be learning the chemical language of pathophysiological processes and how chemical molecules can interact with these processes. No other healthcare profession can read a chemical structure and apply it to clinical application. The science of drug molecules is your science, your area of expertise. You will know how a given drug works, not just the category of the drug. Allows you to distinguish between two very similar drugs. A lot of Me Too drugs, like a lot of new drugs in the market. For example, Rexulti looks awfully similar to Abilify. By learning structure-activity relationships, you can make clinical predictions about a drug. Our goal is to help you prepare to be the pharmacist with whom others are grateful to work. I want your healthcare colleagues to say, oh great, Katie's working today. Your name is working today. Additionally, these skills open opportunities to you if you use them. A PharmD degree represents a high level of expertise in pharmaceutical sciences, among other skills. To be a stellar pharmacist, make it a habit of your practice to use the chemistry and pharmacology you will know. It is a powerful tool that no other health profession has. I really enjoy medicinal chemistry. I think that's apparent on my page. I know that a lot of pharmacists don't really apply these skills in the field. They kind of just get used to the grind and then they just forget them. This is partially why I make my TikToks and my videos, to show what we learn, to show how we can use that in clinical practice. So for those of you still in school, pay attention. It's all important.